Hello, everyone. Before we start, hit that like button and subscribe. Drop a comment with where you are watching from and what time it is for you. That's how YouTube keeps sending you stories like this. And now, let's get into it. I ate alone near closing time, 10:40 p.m. The monsoon season had just ended, and November felt sharper than it usually did. The air was cold clean and carried that wet earth smell that stays after rain for weeks. The restaurant was one of those small roadside places, nothing fancy. A square room filled with plastic chairs that looked the same shade of faded red even when new. The lights hummed above me, soft yellow bulbs inside cheap glass covers, a little fogged from years of smoke and steam. The street outside was silent, no horns, no chatter, no vendors. Karachi, especially this part near University Road, could be loud even at midnight, but tonight it was stripped bare. The recent rains had washed the sky, and even the dust on the cars looked darker, heavier, like it was glued to metal. Most office workers had gone home hours ago. The students from nearby private colleges had scattered earlier in the evening. Even the stray dogs that usually fought over trash were resting somewhere out of sight. I sat near the glass window because the rest of the seats felt too open. The window gave me a wall at my back, which made me feel less exposed. The glass was thin, but it still felt like a border between me and the cold night. Steam from my hot order blurred the bottom half of it. My breath fogged small patches when I exhaled. My throat still felt rough from the flight I took last month. The cold weather after trekking had stuck to me longer than expected. I coughed softly once or twice, covering my mouth out of habit. The food was simple, warm, oily, heavy enough to fight the cold. I didn't scroll on my phone. I didn't want distractions. I wanted awareness. Something about eating this late alone made my senses sharper. Every sound inside the restaurant felt louder than it was. The clink of dishes from the washing corner, the fridge compressor starting and stopping with a mechanical sigh, the water dripping from a leaky pipe under the sink. The floor still had faint wet spots because customers had walked in with damp shoes earlier. I remember the exact moment I saw him, or maybe her. I don't know, just a figure standing across the glass outside in the cold. At first, I thought it was just a student waiting for a ride. Many people wrapped themselves in scarves after the rain because the air cut harder after monsoon than mid-winter sometimes did. The figure wore dark clothes, a scarf pulled high enough to hide most of the face. Only the eyes and a small part of the nose were visible. The streetlight outside was the white LED kind, harsh, overbright, making shadows too deep. The face looked grayish, washed out, like someone had drained the human warmth from it. The part that froze me wasn't the scarf. It was the stillness. A human being never stands that still. Even when waiting, even when annoyed, there is always micro movement. Shifting weight, checking the road, scratching a finger, adjusting clothes. This figure did none of those things. It stood as if the lower half of its body was sealed in cement. The eyes didn't flick to the left or right. They didn't check the restaurant door. They were locked on me, like two black pins aimed at my forehead. My heart tagged the moment like a time stamp. 10:50 p.m. I swallowed slower. My chewing slowed. I didn't look directly. I used the glass reflection to track it at first. The body shape looked average height, average build. Neither thin nor heavy, just generic, which made it scarier. Anything too unusual would feel fake. This felt real. Too real. Like someone who could walk into my life without leaving fingerprints. I kept eating, telling myself it wasn't watching me, that it was just cold, that the empty street made me imagine intentions in blank faces, that maybe it wasn't even looking at me but through the restaurant itself. The problem was, every time I tried to think this way, the eyes stayed glued. No mistaken direction, no drifting gaze. The waiter started wiping tables slowly because closing time was near. Chairs scraped faintly when he moved them slightly to sweep under. I kept eating. My fork collected small amounts. The oil from the food left a film on my lips. I wiped them once with the back of my hand. I checked the figure again. Still there. I felt the cold crawling at my spine, even though the restaurant door was closed. It wasn't the air that scared me. It was the idea that someone would stand outside and watch a stranger eat at 10 p.m. without purpose, without urgency, without checking time. Whoever it wasn't waiting. It was hunting information. and I was the only data point in the frame. For almost 5 minutes, which felt like 50, I built courage in tiny increments, like stacking coins one by one until the tower is tall enough. I told myself I would finish the meal, pay, and walk out like a normal person. Not run, not panic, just walk. I paid tons of 22 p.m. notes a little warm from my pocket. My fingers bumped the plate lightly as I stood. I walked to the door. My legs felt heavier than usual, like my brain added weight to make me cautious. I pushed the glass door open. A small metal bell above it jingled, a cheap alarming sound in silence. The street air hit my face, cold enough to pinch. I looked right at the window spot, empty. The figure was gone. No steps, no fade into distance. Just removed like an object deleted from a photo. Then the waiter shouted from inside, his voice breaking through the vacuum. "Sir, that person left this at the window for you." I turned. He ran to me, holding a crumpled white napkin between his fingers. His eyebrows were tight in confusion, like he had just been handed a small mystery he never asked for. I took the napkin. The texture was thin paper, the kind that melts if you hold it too long with wet hands. There was oil from the window ledge smeared slightly at one corner. The drawing on it was done with a blue ballpoint pen. Not fancy, not neat, but practiced. Someone who draws simple diagrams fast. Someone who has drawn routes before. The diagram showed the exact shape of my hostel gate, the sliding iron gate at the entrance, the guard booth on the right, the small T stall across from it, and arrows showing blind spots where the camera couldn't see, the blind parts near the trash bin wall, the corner where the streetlight bulb flickered often, blind areas marked like pressure points on a weak body. I felt freezing settle deeper than air ever could. This wasn't a prank sketch. This was location study. I walked back to my hostel faster than normal walking speed, but not a run. My brain was tracking escape options instinctively. The napkin was folded tightly in my palm, edges cutting slightly into my fingers. The streets between the restaurant and the hostel were barely 650 meters, but it felt like crossing a border between safety and a problem I didn't sign up for. The footpath clutter, broken tiles, a loose cable hanging low from a pole, bricks stacked near a hardware shop shutter. Everything looked like obstacles that could trip me if someone followed. I kept checking behind using car windows I passed. No one was there. That somehow made me feel worse. At 10:31 p.m. I reached the hostel gate. I didn't go inside right away. I stood near the guard booth light. The flickering LED tube buzzed quietly. The guard was half asleep and didn't see my face tighten. The gate looked exactly like the diagram, which meant the person had really been there, really studied it, really meant for me to see the weak points, or maybe warn me in a threatening way. I went inside and locked my room. I told no one. Not fear, awareness. Some problems don't need witnesses, they just need preparation. The next day, I walked the outer hostel perimeter in daylight and checked every blind spot. The cameras were old, cheap models with slightly blurred angles. The blind areas were real. Exactly real. I spoke to the hostel manager without mentioning fear. I just said I wanted better security for winter because students would come back late often. He upgraded 2 cameras the same week and added one near the trash wall. The blind spots shrank. Not perfect, but tighter now. About a week later, I saw a news clip about student muggings near that same shortcut forest path I used at night. The police caught a small group who scouted areas using diagrams and patrol gap notes. The pen they used was the cheap blue ballpoint kind. The lines looked like the handwriting on my napkin. Not cursive, not fancy, just quick study lines. The intent of the diagram made sense now. It was not a ghost message. It was a human flag, a reality check from someone who wanted to shake me without touching me, a warning, a threat, or maybe a twisted favor. I tore the napkin later and flushed the pieces one by one, watching them spin away. I didn't find the watcher again. But every November after that, when the air gets sharp after rain and the streets go quiet too early, I sit with my back to a wall and eat slower, thinking about how real danger doesn't roar. It just stands quiet, studies you, and hands you the map. The map was a message, and the message pushed me to fix the weak spots before someone else found them for worse reasons. The ending of that night was not confusion. It was direction. It taught me fear is temporary, but scanning reality for exits and blind corners is a habit that keeps you alive long enough to finish your meal in peace. gets dark early in November. Too early. The kind of dark that makes you look twice at the sky and wonder if your watch is lying. The sun feels tired this month, like it wants to clock out before everyone else does. By the time I stepped out of my office building at 5:00 p.m., the light already looked like late evening. The air had that sharp, cold edge, the one that hits the back of your nose and tells you winter is close. My office sits near the industrial side of Islamabad, not the fancy parts where autumn looks poetic. Here, autumn means dead leaves sitting in corners, dust mixed with wind, and the smell of metal and engine smoke always floating around. The parking lot behind the building is long and wide, covered in cracked concrete and faded white lines that no one bothers repainting. Even at noon, it looks empty and quiet. In November evenings, it looks like another world. The road behind the parking lot connects to the main bus stop I use every day. It is not a proper street, just a long stretch of uneven road that runs for about 400 meters before meeting the bus shelter. On one side, there's a boundary wall made of chipped cement blocks, stained with rain marks from years. On the other, there's a patch of wild grass, dead shrubs, and a few thin eucalyptus trees standing with their trunks painted white near the base, like skeletal legs. No streetlights, no shops, nothing. Just the sky fading into black while you walk alone. Usually, people from nearby factories walk the same path around 6:00 or 6:30 p.m., but at 5:00 it is dead silent. Everyone is either inside or driving away. That day it felt even colder than normal. My breath started showing like light smoke every time I exhaled. I pulled my jacket tighter, shoved my hands deep into the side pockets, and started walking the same familiar path, footsteps sounding louder because nothing else was making any sound. As I got closer to the bus stop, I saw a car parked right behind the shelter. A silver old Toyota Corolla, maybe 2008 or 2009 model. Nothing unusual about the car itself. What caught my attention was everything else. The engine was off. The lights were off. Even the parking lights weren't blinking. It looked like someone left it there and forgot about it. I assumed it was an office guy sitting inside for a quick rest. But November cold does funny things to cars. The windows were fogged, completely blurry. Not like partial fog, but total white mist inside the glass. The kind you see when the inside is warmer than outside. Except, the engine wasn't running. No heater could be working. That detail made a small, uncomfortable feeling crawl under my skin. I kept walking until I reached the bus shelter at 5:02 p.m. The bus usually shows up around 5:07 or 5:10 p.m. The shelter itself was an old half-covered metal frame with 3 steel benches. The seats were cold to touch, so I decided to stand. My shoes hit small stones on the ground when I shifted my feet, making tiny crack sounds. The smell of approaching winter mixed with nearby petrol and damp grass. The sky was a heavy dark blue now, almost black, like someone turned the brightness down too fast. I stood facing the road, but my eyes kept pulling back to that parked car. Everything was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no car horns, not even distant traffic noise from the main road. The cold makes animals hide, yes, but it doesn't make sounds vanish completely. My brain kept trying to fill the silence with imaginary noise, but there was nothing to catch. Just a hollow quiet. 5:04 p.m. I checked again. Still parked. No movement. The fog on the glass looked thick and old, like untouched condensation, frozen in place. No figures, no shadows inside, just blank mist. 5:06 p.m. I tried distracting myself by checking my phone, but even scrolling felt pointless. The cold made the screen feel colder under my thumb. The silence kept tugging me back to the car. 5:07 p.m. I looked back again. Still there. Not even a vibration, not a slight tilt of the car from someone shifting inside. If someone was in there, they were very still. 5:08 p.m. I started noticing more small details I would normally ignore. The back tires had a thin layer of dry mud, meaning it drove somewhere rural recently. The side mirror on the driver's side was slightly folded in, like it was squeezed through a narrow path earlier. The license plate was Islamabad registered, normal enough. The car had a small dent near the left rear door, old and rusted on the edges. The fuel cap door looked slightly loose, not fully closed. The windshield wipers had small dead leaves wedged under them. Not new leaves, but dry, curled ones, like they had been sitting there for days. Those tiny things don't mean danger, but they mean a story. And in silence, your brain reads stories differently. 5:09 p.m. A wave of cold wind pushed past me. making the eucalyptus leaves above rustle like paper scratches. That was the first sound I heard in minutes. I realized I was holding my breath longer than normal. I exhaled slowly, watching the white air fade. My heart was thumping in a steady, heavy rhythm now. Nothing crazy, just more present than usual. 5:10 p.m. The fog on the car windows didn't look smooth anymore. I realized the condensation wasn't running down in streaks like normal fogged windows do. It was dry fog, almost frozen mist, as if it had condensed earlier, and then stopped changing completely. November nights can freeze dew, but this was evening. The level of stillness felt unnatural for a real object sitting in cold weather. 5:12 p.m. I shifted my stance slightly, boots scraping the bench edge accidentally, making another small noise. Still nothing from the car. 5:13 p.m. Something in my body clicked into alert mode. It wasn't a thought, it was a reaction. My spine straightened slightly. My ears felt more open, like an old radio antenna stretching for signal. I stopped pretending I wasn't worried. I accepted it. The worry felt heavy. 5:15 p.m. My bus headlights finally appeared far down the main road. 2 round yellow beams cutting into the dark, bobbing slightly because the road wasn't even. Relief loosened something in my chest. The bus slowed into view, brakes whispering against cold metal. I stepped forward, raised my hand slightly, and it rolled to a stop with a hiss of opening doors. Warm breath of inside air spilled out a little, smelling like human bodies, old seat fabric, and heater dust. I got on, found a seat near the window. The seats were still cold, but less cold than outside. The bus started pulling away almost instantly. The tires rolled over gravel near the stop, making crushing sounds that felt oddly comforting. As the bus moved, I twisted my body to look back at the car one more time. That's when everything snapped out of normal. The driver's seat area was clear now. No fog on that exact part of the misted glass, like someone had wiped it from the inside. Except, why would someone wipe just a small round patch on the driver's side and nothing else? And through that clearer circle, I saw no head, no body. Just an empty seat, the headrest fully visible, nothing behind it. A cold punch of fear hit my stomach, but I didn't move. I kept watching. The bus rolled another 20 meters. The angle changed. I could now see the driver's seat window fully unobstructed from fog because the open door on the car reflected a faint yellow halo from the bus tail lights. And the seat was empty, fully empty. My breathing went slow again, but shallow this time. I felt my pulse in my throat. The car door, the driver's side door, it was open. Not just unlocked, not slightly ajar. Open like someone stepped out but never closed it. The door looked darker inside than outside, meaning the vehicle interior was now at the same temperature as the evening air. Why was the fog still there then? It made no sense. Fog doesn't stay thick and unchanged for 10 minutes unless moisture keeps forming. But no heater was running. No engine warmth. No person breathing inside long enough to keep it alive. And then the final detail sliced my logic open. Behind the open driver door, someone had been standing, hidden perfectly from my line of sight while I stared like an idiot at the misted glass. The person wore dark clothing. A thick black coat, hood down, no visible face from that angle. Standing stiff and motionless, like a person waiting for someone specific to turn around at the wrong time. Their shoes were dark boots, heavy ones, maybe military style or hiking boots. Not sneakers, something built to walk far and stand in cold quietly. My blood went ice cold even though the bus was warmer than outside. My brain screamed run, but my body stayed glued to the seat. The bus rolled further, 30 meters, 40 meters. The silhouette shifted slightly, not a wave, not a movement of intention. More like a small correction, like the person adjusted weight from one foot to the other, slowly, like they knew they had been seen. Just enough movement to prove they were real and alive. I turned back forward fast, staring at the road ahead now. My hands felt shaky, but I forced them still. My mind started asking the dangerous questions. What if the bend in the river earlier was a good place to grab someone? What if the bus had arrived a little later? What if I had walked behind the shelter instead of stopping in front of it? What if I had sat on that bench instead, my back facing that car? I didn't want to finish those thoughts. The bus turned left onto the main road at 5:00 p.m. Streetlights finally appeared, spaced far but visible, casting orange smudges through the bus glass. Cars passed now, honking lightly, humans walking on footpaths. The world felt normal again, but it felt fragile, like a paper wall between safe and unsafe. I didn't relax. Not really. I kept watching reflections in glass, shadows moving outside, and cars parked in silence near roads. Everything felt watched now. I got off the bus 2 stops early at 5:32 p.m. I usually walked another 10 minutes home, but that day I didn't want isolation again. I moved through crowded areas only. My street had more people walking home from shops, carpet sellers closing stores, tea stall owners wiping counters. I blended into the crowd intentionally, like camouflage. My footsteps mixed with others, disappearing into public noise. I made a mental note of the car details, because fear makes memory sharp. Silver Corolla, old dent, folded mirror, loose fuel cap door, dry fog, open driver door, dark boots behind it, black coat, no visible face. November wilderness mud on tires. Leaves under wipers that had no business staying there for days, unless someone used that car as a waiting shell, not a daily driver. At 6:04 p.m., I reached my home gate and locked it quietly. My hands trembled slightly while turning the key, but I didn't panic. Panic is loud. Loud gets you noticed. I walked into the house, shut every curtain, checked every latch, and then sat in silence in my own living room with the lights off for a few minutes, staring at the fabric folds of darkness. The street sound outside kept ticking like a heart monitor.
Normal live human.
The next morning, 8:11 a.m., I took a cab to work instead of the bus. It cost more, but distance feels different when you control the timing. I asked the cab driver to drop me closer, on the front side of the building instead of the back. Sitting in the back seat, I kept staring at the rear view mirrors of passing cars, watching live silhouettes move, because movement means predictability. Predictability means human. At 8:29 a.m., I walked again to the back parking side, curiosity now mixing with dread, because you don't really move on from a blank in logic until you fill it. The car was gone. No trace, no broken leaves, no open door, no tire marks. Just a small patch of darker damp soil near where the driver door had opened, like melted frost, and even that was already fading into the dry road. I asked myself one final question that clicked everything into place. The road was unmarked. The bus stop was barely known. The car wasn't resting. It was positioned at the only blind angle point behind the shelter. Engine cold, lights cold, interior fogged earlier to look occupied from a distance. Door left open to hide the person behind it. The silence wasn't nature. It was intention. I never saw the person again, but I didn't need a second meeting to understand the first one. I changed my route. I changed my timing. I stopped trusting silence. Silence is where bad plans breathe best, and November darkness still comes too early. But now I do too much fewer idiot things inside it. It rained all week. Not the kind of rain that passes, but the kind that stays in the air even after it stops. The kind that makes everything damp for days. The forest behind my hostel became a thick, soggy maze of shiny tree soles and soaked, brown leaves. Every morning when I stepped outside, the air had that heavy, earthy smell of rotten bark and wet soil, like something was breathing beneath the trees. The path I usually took to my college bus stop was flooded for days, which is how I ended up taking the forest shortcut again. I hadn't used it since summer, when the sun still made it look warm and harmless. But now, in November, the sun barely tried. It got dark early in November, too early. Gray sky at 4 p.m., black by 5. The nights were longer, thicker. Even inside the hostel, the light seemed weaker against it. The forest shortcut started just behind the hostel laundry shed. You had to squeeze between a group of tall, thin pine trees before landing on the trail. The trees stood so close to each other they blocked most of the sky, like tall, quiet guards who didn't care who passed through. The ground was an uneven quilt of mud patches, puddles that still shimmered from the morning drizzle, twisted roots sticking out like veins, and a million leaves pressed flat and glued to the soil by rain. My shoes made sticky suction sounds each time I stepped. The leaves tried to swallow every bit of noise, but my steps still had that faint, wet slap. That day, the rain had stopped for a few hours before evening. Just enough time to trick people into thinking it wouldn't return. I pulled my jacket's hood over my head and walked out at 5:18 p.m. I noted the time for no reason other than the cold making me more aware of small things. My throat still burned a bit from the cold I got on the flight here months back. Winter colds never left gracefully here. They just hunched in your body like unwanted guests. The path cut through the forest in a mildly curved line. It wasn't wide, just wide enough for one person to walk without brushing against the bushes too often. On the right side, the ground sloped downward, falling into a wide, leaf-stuffed ditch that eventually met a small stream. The stream was fattened from rain, gurgling low like distant stomach growls. On the left side, thick bushes, naked shrubs, and trees with slippery trunks climbed uphill. Most of the trees were bald by now, their branches sharp and black, scribbling disorder on the cloudy sky beyond the pines. I tried to keep a steady pace, but the ground made its own rules. My steps were okay until I reached the dip a few minutes in, where water pooled in a shallow basin of leaves. Each step squelched deeper. I didn't mind the mess at first. It felt seasonal, natural, ugly but expected. That's when I heard the footsteps behind me. It wasn't a human rhythm, not the casual pace of someone walking to class or heading back to the hostel. These steps were slow, uneven. One sounded heavier, one sounded lighter. The lighter one dragged a little, like the owner didn't lift their foot properly. The leaves cracked under them in deliberate, violent punctuation marks. Crunch. Crunch. Drag. Louder than the leaves under my shoes. Louder than the water under the leaves. Like whoever walked behind me wanted to be heard, but only barely. The sound didn't blend into the place. It conflicted with it. The forest was a soft ruin of dead leaves and water. These steps were jarring, weighty, wrong. I didn't run. Running would have made me look back too fast too soon. Instead, I walked slightly faster, pretending to myself it was just another student taking the same shortcut. But denial has a small lifespan when you're listening too closely. The steps followed crunch, drag, crunch, drag. Always about 20 feet behind, sometimes 15 when the wind dropped. I knew because sound travels differently when the world is soaked. Leaves that are dry make normal crunchy sounds. Leaves that are wet make dull, softer sounds. These were sharp, too sharp. The pressure needed to make that noise on wet leaves meant the person behind me was stomping or injured or something else that didn't fit my original lie. Then the silence hit, sudden, complete silence. No last step, no shuffle, no wind down. Just a full stop. The forest swallowed the rest the way it swallows rain sounds, quick and unapologetic. My breath steamed inside the hood, my ears buzzing with the sudden lack of sound. I stopped too, frozen, in that thin space between moving forward and turning back. The sharp cold kissed the back of my neck where the hood didn't touch. It felt like being watched by a weather system. I turned. There was no face, no person, no shape leaning against a tree, no hoodie wearing student checking their phone, no one leaning downhill to rest. Nothing, just the path, and a single shoe, a wet, muddy shoe, left right in the center of the trail like a placed full stop at the end of a sentence I didn't ask to read. It was a right shoe. Big, worn, lace still tied. The leather was dark brown but soaked nearly black from mud. Dry grass fibers stuck to the sole. The upper shoe tongue was pushed slightly sideways, like someone had kicked it off without using hands. Mud crusted on the toe cap in thick, uneven lines. You don't lose one shoe on a straight, quiet forest path on a rainless evening like that. And you don't leave it standing upright in the middle unless someone dropped it intentionally or something happened at that exact point. I tried remembering the previous days of using that path. Shoes didn't exist there. Not yesterday, not the day before. Not even in summer. I would have noticed a single abandoned shoe, because the path is too clean for trash in some seasons and too untouched for leftovers in others. I crouched without touching it, just to look closer. The inside had moisture fog, and a smear of wet mud like a sock had been pulled out. A cheap wool sock edge still poked slightly from the ankle collar, like someone yanked it halfway as the shoe came off. The heel area looked rubbed, like it carried someone who walked too much too often. There was history in that shoe, but no story explaining its sudden freedom from its owner. I stood up again, my heart tapping against my ribs with the same uneven rhythm the steps had moments ago. The shoe stared upward, lifeless but accusatory. I backed away a few steps without meaning to. My own footprints in the mud looked insultingly normal beside it. I kept walking, much faster now. My jacket crinkled each time I exhaled too deeply. The stream below bubbled louder the deeper I went. I checked uphill for any sign of someone limping uphill after losing a shoe. Nothing. I checked downhill for anyone slipping toward the ditch. Nothing. No crash sounds, no calls for help, no voice. No phone flashlight swinging, just the quiet autopsy of autumn under rain. I reached the halfway mark where a huge oak tree leaned slightly across the path. Its roots cracked through the ground like crooked fingers. The mud was thicker here. High puddles rippling under fallen branches. That's when I saw the print trail. Single footprints, just one shoe print, the right one. Same pattern as the shoe I left behind. Crescent dent on the outer sole, straight line groove next to it. It continued forward, uneven drag marks following each step, like the left foot slid behind each time without rising. The drag mark wasn't random. It was continuous, smooth at edges, like cloth or rubber or skin grazing the soil without separation. The step gap was small at first, then wide, then small, like the person's balance kept failing, recovering, failing again. The dragging line narrowed toward the right side sometimes, as if the walker veered downhill before correcting again. Human panic walking has that pattern, but humans also swear or talk to themselves or gasp loudly when injured. This person leaked no narrative air sounds, only footsteps and absence. The path here grew darker first. The pines above let in less sky, and the naked branches of the uphill trees built a cage of shadows. The early darkness of November filled every gap like black water. I used my phone flashlight sparingly, pointing it only at the ground directly ahead, cautious not to reveal more than needed. Light invites attention too sometimes. The prints led deeper toward the old dam ruins past the hostile boundary. The dam had been inactive for years, a concrete ghost of infrastructure swallowed by vines in monsoon seasons and hidden by leaves in autumn. I hadn't planned to go that far, but the path made the choice for me because turning back would have meant walking past the shoe again, walking past the sentence origin again. At 5:36 p.m., the drizzle teased a return, tiny taps on the leaves above like quiet encouragement. The ground glistened more under the faint light. My breathing was loud inside me now, like internal footsteps. I started recognizing the shoe print drag pattern as someone not walking so much as being forced forward step by step. Dragging marks can be opportunistic, injury, exhaustion. But these drag marks were submissive, like the left foot didn't try anymore, like it agreed to be less. I noticed odd disturbances on the leaves to the right, where the print path occasionally drifted. Leaves shoved sideways into small piles. Mud spatters in random arcs like someone slipped, but wasn't allowed to fall. You don't recover balance that many times without grabbing at something or sitting down. This person never paused fully. The forest showed signs of micro fights against gravity, but never the macro surrender humans indulge when possible. The trees thinned slightly near the dam clearing. The stream widened into a shallow, angry snake pushing against rocks swollen from rain memories. The sound here was different, more honest. Water doesn't hide like trees do. The print trail stopped flatter here. Drag marks dissolved into an irregular smear before, ending beside a thick puddle near some rusted dam rebar poking out. The rebar jutted out like broken teeth from the ground. A tire track also sat near the puddle but faint, washed, possibly days old. I scanned the clearing. The air had the sharp, cold, calm forests have when humans aren't around. The dam concrete was silent overhead ruin. Wet moss clung to its wall like mold on bread. Leaves decorated its cracks like funeral confetti. I stepped forward slowly. My flashlight beam widened. Then I saw the second shoe near the dam wall. Same make, same size. The left shoe mud-covered, laying on its side. The laces were still tied. The heel collar had a small tear exposing sponge foam inside. A thin red mark dried like rust on the ankle opening, but it wasn't rust. The distance between the first shoe and this one was deliberate. The placement of the first shoe, uphill with no owner around, felt like bait. The second shoe downhill felt like proof of arrival. Like someone marked both ends of a trail to show me the shape of an absence. I didn't want to stare too long. My eyes tried turning the red smear into mud or rust or foam, light illusion, but denial had already expired earlier on the trail. I backed away again, then stepped sideways to look at the stream path below. The stream was low enough for footprints to last on softer banks. No prints. No struggle signs in the water. No left foot meets water stories. If someone fell in, the forest would gossip with broken branch sounds or splash recollections. Water had no memory of that body. I exhaled hard. The phone time read 5:47 p.m. Cold creeped faster now. I pieced together the most realistic chain my brain could accept. Someone walked behind me. Maybe injured, maybe limping. Shoe came off in mud suction. They continued walking, dragging one foot. They lost the second shoe at the clearing. Maybe slipped to the stream. But the lack of prints below or uphill or downhill never supported a fall. So if they didn't fall and they didn't go uphill and they didn't go downhill and they didn't walk past the clearing, then the possibility left wasn't ghost or folklore. It was human interference before the trail started, then removal by vehicle or force once the shoes completed their last mission of being noticed. Someone was here. Then someone else took them away. Quietly, efficiently. Rain all week helped hide sounds before November evening let me hear them briefly. Early darkness helped hide shapes while leaving objects visible enough to question. I didn't call the police that night, because what would I tell them? That I heard uneven steps, found a shoe, followed prints, found another shoe, but no one. No witness. No evidence beyond 2 wet shoes and leaf chaos. Forest shortcuts don't carry subpoena-proof stories. They only carry mud and seasonal signatures. There was no camera here, no backup brain. Just my senses and the rain, which is the most honest accomplice. But I did report it next morning anonymously on the local student safety page. The hostel later sent an email reminding students not to use forest shortcuts alone after dark in winter months. Someone else must have reported something too. Maybe not about the same shoes, but maybe about other unfinished sentences the forest tried, showing before November completed them with darkness. I never used that shortcut again after sunset. Not out of fear of ghosts, but out of respect for the very human truth that forests keep scenes neat for seasons. And when they don't, there is a hand involved, and the hand doesn't always sign its name. Weeks later, the rain finally stopped for good, and winter cemented the ground. The leaves dried into fragile skeletons. The stream thinned into a calmer whisper. But I knew now. November rains don't decorate forests. They erase them. And early darkness doesn't hide monsters. It just hides people who don't want to leave footprints at all. I remember November 14th clearly because the weather finally flipped that morning. The sticky heat from October had been swept away, like a curtain pulled back. The air felt cold and washed, unusually clean for the season. Wedding season was in full swing. In Pakistan, weddings don't come quietly. They spill into every street, every shop, every normal routine. Music blaring from speakers taped onto electricity poles, fairy lights tangled across building fronts, the smell of roasted kebabs and burnt gunpowder from firecrackers, people honking even when there's nowhere to go. November is a whole mood. It is loud, messy, crowded, half beautiful, half exhausting. That evening, I left home after Maghrib, around 6:47 p.m. The sky had already turned pitch black. The streets near my place were bright with wedding lights. But once you walked a bit outside those circles, the darkness between them felt deeper than usual. I took a rickshaw to Anarkali Bazaar. Sitting inside it, knees tucked because there was barely space, I watched the blur of yellow bulbs, red cloth decorations, and people carrying boxes of sweets and gifts. Vendors were shouting prices of walnuts and almonds, phones flashing as people recorded Mendy entrances, and somewhere ahead, a doll kept hammering the air with that hollow rhythmic boom you can feel in your chest. The driver zigzagged through cars, stuck in traffic like it was a daily sport. Every few seconds, the rickshaw vibrated when someone lit firecrackers too close. My whole ride felt like riding inside someone else's celebration. I reached the bazaar at 7:29 p.m. The ground was wet from a week of rain. Mud mixed with orange and brown autumn leaves that had begun to rot. They stuck to the soles of my shoes, making a soft peeling sound every time I walked. The shops glittered with packets of pistachios and dried figs hanging like curtains. I went straight to a dry fruit store I'd known since childhood. The moment I stepped in, heat hit me like an oven. The crowd inside barely left room to breathe. Men in shawls, women in embroidered suits carrying shopping lists written on tiny paper slips, delivery boys bumping shoulders with everyone, kids impatient, bored, tugging at sleeves. Everyone was buying, Boxes of cashews, saffron strings folded into tiny pouches, raisins by the kilo. It felt impossible to move without stepping into someone's personal space. I bought almonds first, then walnuts, then dried apricots. The smell of mixed nuts, wooden shelves, and wet clothes drying from body heat created a strange foggy scent that clung to the throat. Every time the shop door opened, cold, bizarre air rushed in, fighting the warm air inside. The temperature clash made the glass window beside me fog up in seconds. Vendors outside kept throwing handfuls of peanuts into metal scales, the clink of weights sounding sharp in the cold. It was almost 10:40 p.m. when I stepped out again, finally clutching my bag of purchases and feeling lighter, because the street outside gave at least some breathing space. Or so I thought. That was when I saw the van. White vans are not unusual in the city. I didn't think much at first, but this one came slow, too slow. It didn't push past traffic like every other vehicle in the bazaar. It crawled. The street was packed with people buying gifts, loading groceries into rickshaws, cousins walking in groups holding hands so they wouldn't get lost, wedding crowds shifting like tides. Firecrackers were going off every few minutes somewhere nearby, short loud blasts followed by sparks sizzling against wet ground. Everyone was distracted. Everyone was half deaf to anything constant because wedding noise becomes background noise here. You only notice it when it stops. The van moved beside the walking crowd as if it was part of it, not separate from it. Its windows were tinted black, impossible to see through. The side door wasn't fully shut. A thin gap, maybe a few inches, showed that the lock wasn't secured. From inside, a hand gripped the inner edge of the door. A real hand. Not a shadow, not a trick of light. Skin stretched over knuckles, tense, pale from cold or nerves, nails short and uneven like someone who bites them without noticing. The fingers weren't still. They tapped the metal frame in irregular little ticks. First the index finger, then the middle, then the thumb knocking softly, like testing strength. The tapping rhythm made no pattern, just a restless, nervous motion, but it felt like a clock seconds away from ringing. Something about that motion made my pulse spike. I stepped back automatically without meaning to. My heel hit a pile of wooden crates stacked behind me near a fruit cart. The movement jolted me awake, like instinct shoved reason aside. The tapping fingers froze for a split second. That second stretched. Then the bazaar erupted again. Kids screamed with excitement as a vendor lit a fresh string of firecrackers, sparks flying sideways like tiny shooting stars. Music from a nearby wedding speaker dipped into a heavy bass beat that shook the ground. Laughter mixed with honks. More explosions cracking the air one after another. The crowd moved sharply like a herd startled by sound, bags rustling, bangles jangling, someone dropping a kilo of peanuts onto the wet ground. The van shot forward instantly. The tapping resumed in a frenzy, then its engine roared and it sped away. It didn't just drive, it escaped. The crowd continued celebrating like nothing had split the air seconds earlier. But I stayed frozen at the spot for almost a minute, maybe more. My breathing fogged in front of my face like steam from a kettle left to scream unnoticed. People pushed past me. Nobody looked at the van. Nobody saw the hand. Or maybe some did, but the noise swallowed their reactions before they could fully form. November noise doesn't let you think. It only lets you feel. And what I felt was that the van moved on intention, not coincidence. As if it timed itself with explosions, not traffic. I followed the van's direction with my eyes, until it became a white smudge dissolved into wedding lights and night haze. My shoes were still pulling wet leaves off the road, every time I shifted my weight. The bazaar around me continued banging like normal, but my brain went louder than the fireworks. I walked to a nearby tea stall 50 meters ahead, needing something normal to hold on to. The vendor poured tea into small clay cups. The steam curled into the cold night like cigarette smoke, thick and warm. I noticed my hands trembling slightly when I lifted the tea. Clay cups don't have handles, so the heat goes straight into your fingers. That heat grounded me. I forced myself to look around like everyone else, busy in their routines. Wedding guests carrying envelopes. A fruit vendor stacking oranges with numb red palms. A bike stuck in mud with one wheel spinning without moving forward. Normal chaos. Normal life. But something was wrong. Not obvious. Just off kilter. Like a note inside a song that doesn't match the scale, but most people don't notice unless they listen alone. I didn't stay at the stall for long. I kept walking, that uneasy feeling pulling me forward like a rope tied to my spine. I reached the main bazaar intersection around 10:41 p.m., where wedding processions had blocked half the road. Cars stood bumper to bumper, fog forming on every windshield from the cold. A groom's car was decorated in gold flowers. Cousins were dancing around it with phone cameras out. Tiny children were holding sparklers, waving them like magic wands. The noise was covering everything and everyone. I waited there a few minutes until I saw a policeman 20 feet away managing traffic. I walked to him without thinking too much, because suddenly my silence felt dangerous. My voice didn't need to speak. My body language said enough. He noticed. His eyes narrowed, not suspicious of me, but alert. Uniform collar pulled high from the cold. Walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, faint static whispering from it like insects stuck in a jar. He asked nothing. I said nothing. But I pointed in the direction the van had gone earlier. He followed my point with his eyes. Then he pulled his walkie-talkie, turned his back to the crowd slightly, and spoke low into it. The static popped under his whisper. Nothing happened instantly. Life kept bursting around us. But this time, someone else was aware. Someone else was clocking the wrong note. I walked home after I got a rickshaw near the main road at 11:03 p.m. My purchases sat on my lap. Nuts and dried apricots in thin plastic bags, stacked inside a bigger bag. The kind you carry without ever paying attention to, unless you suddenly realize you might lose it. I held it tightly the whole ride. The wedding lights dimmed behind me slowly like the closing chapter of someone else's story. I reached home at 11:28 p.m. My street was quiet compared to the bazaar. No speakers. No doll. Only cold wind pushing dried leaves into corners, swirling them lightly like hesitant footsteps. I locked my gate and slammed the bolt manually. The metallic clink felt louder than fireworks, but safer. The next morning, I checked the local news, because the feeling didn't leave me when the van did. Around 8:12 a.m., one headline confirmed something I had feared but hadn't named. Police had stopped a white van near the outskirts of the city, close to motorway roadblocks after receiving suspicious activity reports. Inside, they found tied clothing ropes, tape number plates, fake delivery boxes, and signs that the van had been altered from inside, not outside. Extra locks, soundproof padding torn off a side panel, fingerprints smudged across the sliding door frame. No ghosts, no demons. Just humans sharpening their tools in the dark. They had caught the van before anyone was taken. But the police statement stressed something else too. The van was spotted moving unusually slow through crowded markets during peak celebration noise, using firecrackers and wedding sound bursts as cover to avoid attention. That detail hit my stomach harder than any supernatural horror could. It meant the tapping fingers weren't random nerves. It was timing, preparation. Seconds being counted against noise, not numbers. The white blur fleeing through firecrackers wasn't a coincidence. It was tactic. Later that day, I unpacked the dry fruits into jars at 2:07 p.m. The sound of nuts dropping into glass felt tiny, harmless, normal again. I sealed each jar tightly. Outside my window, wedding lights were already going up again even before evening. November chaos doesn't stop for reflection, but I had mine. The bizarre noise, the white crawl of engine against crowds, the cracked sliding door revealing a real human hand, the frantic tapping frozen in sound bursts. Those seconds pinned themselves into my memory like photographs you never took but can't delete. The ending was clear, solid, human-made, resolved but chilling. The van was real, the tactic was real, and the hand tapping at the metal door wasn't signaling a ghost story starting. It was signaling a disaster that could have started, but didn't, only because the noise that night covered everything except the one person who noticed something was counting down behind it. And that was me. I drive slow on foggy nights, always. Especially in November. I learned that habit the hard way, growing up near foothills where damp air and cold land meet to make white walls out of thin wind. But habit and preparation can only take you so far when the world decides to push back. It was November 14th, a Thursday, the kind of late autumn evening where the day never really seems to arrive. The sun checked out early and dusk lingered like a bruise. I left my job at the packaging warehouse just before 6:30 p.m. I remember the exact clock, and I punched out with 18:27. The warehouse sat on the flat edge of town. To get home, I had to take Route 72, a narrow two-lane highway that skimmed the base of old, barren hills on one side and an overgrown stretch of unused farmland on the other. No street lamps for long gaps. No shops. No houses until you hit the first scattered outskirts 18 miles in. By 6:40 p.m., fog was already forming in thin sheets. 10 minutes later, at 6:48 p.m., it had thickened into something that felt almost physical. I had my hands firm on the wheel of my old gray Corolla, year 2009. Not fancy, not loud. Just a decent car that smelled like engine oil near the vents when the heater was on high. The heater was definitely on high. The inside glass kept trying to mist up. I kept wiping it with my sleeve without really thinking. The fog that evening wasn't the poetic kind. It didn't roll like smoke in a movie. It hung there, silent, flat, choking detail out of everything more than 30 feet away. My headlights felt useless. I could see particles of water floating in the beams like slow snow. The road lines kept disappearing and reappearing underneath me. I slowed to 22 miles, then 18 miles around bends. The engine hummed low and steady, vibrations calming in the oddest way, like the car was breathing for me. I remember thinking how weird it was that there were no distant city glows at all. Even fog usually can't swallow every bit of light. But it did that night. No glimmer, no hints. Just white and dark trading places ahead of me. Then I saw the lights. 2 bright dots. Car height, stationary. Centered in my lane far ahead. Sharp circles, steady like drilled stars. My pulse nudged me, slow at first, then quicker. I blinked my lights once. Nothing. Again, nothing. The circles didn't flare or shrink. No motion inside them. No glow spill that headlights make when they hit wet air. These were direct, clean white points. No yellow tinge. No hello. Too perfect. Too focused. I tapped the horn. A small beep, weak. The horn on that car never liked cold weather. Then I pressed harder, held a 2-second honk. Still nothing. Those dots stayed still. I inched closer, body leaning forward without meaning to. Windshield cleared. Wipers off. The fog was thick outside, but the glass was finally clean. My breathing was slow, but shallow. My chest felt tight, but not in a pain way. More like anticipation. Fear without chaos. At maybe 80 feet away, the dots moved. Upward. First a few inches, then higher, climbing slow and steady. My brain tried to force the shape of a car rearing upward, like maybe someone was on a steep incline. But the road was flat. Dead flat. I knew every dip and rise on Route 72. This stretch had no incline, not even a 1-degree slope. The lights kept climbing. 5 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet high. Then 12 feet. Headlights can't do that. Then they tilted slightly downward at me again, but from above. That's when I understood. These were flashlights. Big, military, grade, LED white. Someone was walking uphill. The hill slope started right off the road shoulder. They had climbed onto the rough dirt face of the hill, and they were pointing both lights at me as they walked. Tracking me. Not scanning the road, not checking their steps. Just me. I braked gently to a full stop, tires whispering instead of skidding. The fog swallowed any sound fast anyway. My heart was definitely loud inside me now. I pulled the car slightly toward the right lane edge, not fully off the road, just closer to the shoulder. My muscles felt cold even though the car was warm. My face felt hot. The person was maybe 20-30 feet up the hill by then. No silhouette except a vague darker mass of movement behind the beams. Flashlights that strong blind more than they reveal. I could see chunks of dirt lodged between sparse grass on the incline. No trees there, just rough hill face. The beam reflections shimmered off tiny wet stones embedded in the dirt. I watched the footpath of their climb through subtle disruptions in the fog, like the air moved around them unwillingly. I'd guess they were tall. The steps were long, measured, and consistent. Not hurried, but not casual either. Purposeful. The kind of controlled pace someone keeps when they're not interested in falling, but also not interested in stopping. I didn't turn the car off. Big mistake if I needed to move fast. I didn't open a window. Bad idea in unknown situations. I didn't grab my phone. Even worse. Panic makes you weirdly technical about safety, but terribly forgetful about the tools that actually help. From 50 feet feels far until you're alone on a dark road. 50 feet is nothing. Moose attack stories I used to read always mention that distance. 50 feet. 50 feet is smaller than you think when the thing watching you is bigger than you expected. This wasn't an animal. That was another level. A person, alone, in fog, on an unlit highway, hills that had no hiking use, no houses, no parking cuts, and no reason for someone to be climbing there at that hour holding flashlights like that, except to look at someone passing by. What made it scarier was the steadiness. Chaos is easier to understand. Even anger, panic, or drunken stumbling feels human and predictable. This was calm, silent, intent without emotion. I slowly put the car in reverse, just enough to creep back 10 feet. The backup camera cutoff morphed into fog anyway, but the mirrors told me I was clear. The lights twitched, not frantic, but they adjusted to repoint at me again. Leaders don't lose target, hunters don't lose eye contact. That's when I decided leaving the area entirely was the only good plan I had. No pride, no curiosity. No bravery point would matter if I sat there trying to analyze motives on a dead road with no witnesses. I reversed to a safe turn cut that I knew existed 0.3 miles back, near a forestry sign. The hill lights stayed aimed at me until I vanished behind thicker fog. When I hit the cut, I turned the wheel hard right and did a U-turn. Gravel crunched under the tires as I swung around. Headlights forward again. My car rocked slightly, suspension aching quietly, and then I was pointed back the way I came. As I drove past the spot again, slower now, I saw nothing but fog. No lights, no movement uphill, no person returning to the road. No flashlight glow, just emptiness, but not relief. Not at first. For 12 straight miles back toward town, I checked the rear mirror every 3 to 4 seconds. No cars, no lights. My brain replayed every motion in detail. The lift, the climb, the tilt, the tracking. It felt too intentional to just be random behavior. At mile 12.7, I finally saw something that looked real again. A passing delivery truck, yellow cabin lights glowing faint through the fog, rumbling toward the warehouse direction. Normal, loud, human. Purposeful but not aimed at me. The truck honked a friendly hello, acknowledgement honk as it passed. That sound helped more than any therapy ever did. When I reached the gas station at the town edge at 7:11 p.m., I pulled in and parked under lights for 14 full minutes before buying anything. My hands shook once when I tried to remove them from the steering wheel. My palms were damp. My lower back hurt from tension. My legs felt like I had just climbed 20 flights of stairs. The cashier glanced at me when I finally entered, hoodie overhead, jeans muddy near the ankle from the turn-cut gravel, face pale, eyes probably wild. I didn't even care if I looked strange. I was alive. That was the baseline for the night. Police cruisers later drove that road at 9:00 p.m. after I called in the incident anonymously from a payphone outside the station. My cell had no service back on the highway anyway. They never reported finding anyone up that hill or near the shoulder. Maybe the person moved deeper into the hills. Maybe they were doing something I was lucky not to learn. Maybe it was a one-off stock incident. I don't know. I don't need to know. Real fear doesn't always get a neat motive attached. The ending was good because it was mine to write. No hero arc, no showdown, no final stare back at danger. Just a small decision to put distance first, warmth second, answers last. I learned that night that realism is scarier than ghosts because ghosts are stories. People are variables. I drove home slow even after the fog thinned, heater ticking as it cooled, tires humming steady, breathing deeper now. Alive with a new rule added to my life: November fog gives cover, not poetry. And if headlights climb upward, I will never wait around to ask why. It's late November, the kind of night that starts early and feels long. Power outages are normal here in winter, but in November they get worse. The hours without electricity stretch longer every week, almost expected now, almost routine. But that night at exactly 8:36 p.m., the power went off like someone pulled a plug on the whole street. The sudden quiet is the first thing you notice. No ceiling fan, no fridge buzzing, no elevator humming, just still air and silence. The whole building groaned into darkness. The emergency corridor lights flickered once, twice, then died too, like they tried, then gave up. I was sitting on my bed when it happened, jacket still on, shoes half, untied from coming home a few minutes earlier. The room got cold fast. When the fan stopped spinning, the air felt heavier, warmer at first, then colder. I grabbed my phone from the side table, switched on the torch, and opened my apartment door. The corridor outside was pitch black. The wall paint, which looks cream in daylight, looked yellowish under the small torch beam. The smell of old dust and a hint of gas from a neighbor's kitchen sat in the air. I locked my door behind me, the metal click sounding too loud for the sudden silence. I live on the 7th floor of this apartment. Waiting for the elevator during a blackout is pointless, so I went toward the stairwell. The steel fire door was cold to the touch. Under normal light it looks gray, clean, unremarkable. That night it looked like a dull metal void. I pulled it open, the hinges scraping quietly. The staircase was darker than the corridor. Even when the power is on, this stairwell is dim. Now it was like stepping into a tunnel. My phone beam barely lit 1 or 2 steps ahead. The floor was concrete, rough in some spots, smooth in others. The railing was old iron, chipped paint, little flakes of rust at the joins. Each step echoed my shoe sound faintly, a dull knock like tapping on packed soil. I started down, slow, one hand near the wall, boot soles gripping the edge because I couldn't judge depth. The walls felt cold when my sleeve brushed them. There are small scuff marks from bikes and furniture moved during the day, but under torchlight, those marks look like hand streaks, long lines dragged downward. I kept telling myself it was just shadows and imagination, but even normal things look wrong in the dark. By the time I reached the 5th floor landing, the air felt colder. One doesn't reach here, but the building traps cold like a box. My breath was faint, not fog thick like outside, but just enough to see when the phone light cut across. The echo of the street generator far away thudded every few seconds, a low rumble, like a distant truck engine stuck at idle. At the 4th floor landing, I noticed something else. A thin draft, not wind, just a slight movement of air, like a door somewhere was open. Maybe someone else had gone out. Maybe a window in the corridor broke earlier. I didn't check. I just kept moving. When I hit the 3rd floor, the landing opened into a wider square space before the next set of stairs dipped. My beam hit the floor first, then the railing, then, slowly, the shape of a person. Someone was sitting on the landing, back a little slumped, head bent down. The first impression was that they were tired. Maybe someone stuck without a key. Maybe someone charging their phone by the generator during the evening and got stranded. But then details sharpened. The person wore a heavy black hoodie, slightly oversized, sleeves rolled too long, covering half the hands. Dark joggers. Boots that looked thick, winter type, not the cheap kind, but durable, outdoor type. The soles had mud, dried at the edges like they walked a long distance before coming in. The hood was pulled deep, face almost fully down. The cold air made his breath visible. A thin gray cloud came out, slow and steady. No rush, like controlled breathing. His hands were out in front, resting near his knees, shaking a little. Not frantic, not big tremors either. The kind of shaking you get when you've been outside for hours in the cold. His shoulders were slightly raised, like he was holding warmth in. The beam hit his shoes again. Mud. Tiny bits of dried leaves stuck at the heel edge. That meant he wasn't from the building, or if he was, he'd been outside long enough for winter dirt to stick and dry. My heart kicked once hard. My brain tried to connect safe reasons, but nothing sat right. Who sits in a stairwell landing in total darkness with the hood that deep, breathing that calm, hands that close to the body, shoes that traveled miles before stepping in? He wasn't leaning against the wall. He was centered, like someone who planned a spot, not someone who collapsed into one. The phone battery ticked lower. The torch reflection cut across his head. Slowly, with no rush at all, he raised his face just enough. Not a full lift, not a greeting motion, just a tiny tilt upward, almost lazy, just enough for the light to bounce off one eye. His eye didn't glow on its own. It was the reflection from my phone torch, hitting the wet surface of a pupil adjusted to full darkness. But the way it caught the light made it look sharp, glassy, bright for a split second, like an animal's eye when headlights hit it on a road. There was no fear in it, no tiredness, no panic, no sadness. No surprise at my presence. Just a look that felt settled, patient, almost measured, like he expected someone to try to go past him. The real odd part was the stillness around the eye. No blink. No flinch to light. No hand raised to block brightness. Nothing. Most people jerk back from torchlight after sitting in the dark. He didn't. He absorbed it like it was part of a plan. The power usually goes off to cut load during peak hours. That means fewer people roam around. Older families already stay inside. Most students don't use the stairs. I realized the pattern too fast. Nobody would come down these stairs for a long time. I stepped back once, the boot sole making a small scrape. The sound carried more than it should have. His eye tracked it. Just a tiny movement, but enough. I turned, and I ran upward, then down again, skipping steps. Thumb sweat making the phone shake in my hand. I didn't try to see him again. I didn't try to take an extra peek behind. I didn't stop to think. Instinct doesn't use logic. Instinct pushes you to move. The remaining climb down felt different now. Cold corridors that felt annoying before now felt alive, charged, dangerous. I hit the second floor, then first, and when I finally pushed into the apartment lobby, the building generator had kicked in, but only for the lobby. A weak yellow single bulb hung over the room. The watchman wasn't at the desk. Probably gone to check something outside. Even his empty chair felt wrong now. The glass doors to exit were fogged from the outside cold. I pushed out onto the street. The cold hit hard, louder here, more wind, parked cars lined up, wet dew on the roof edges from early fog. On the sidewalk, a delivery scooter was parked. The back box was open. Inside, tape rolls, zip ties, gloves. I didn't see it clearly through the box itself. I knew it because the mud pattern on the bike wheels matched the dried mud on the boots I saw upstairs. The bike wasn't abandoned. It was placed there, angled away from street cameras, close to the building's blind spot, where the lens can't reach from either side, like someone who had time. I didn't call the police right then. My brain was running too fast, too loud, too unsure. But the next morning, when the power schedule came back online at 10:47 a.m., the security cameras for the stairwell showed that the man got up at 8:51 p.m., walked down slowly, checked the lower floors, then returned to the third floor landing again. He stayed there until 11:10 p.m., then left the building normally, hoodie still on, face still low. 2 days later, a break-in happened at a building 4 streets away during another outage. No house light, no camera coverage, exactly same timing pattern, same method. The CCTV footage from the street caught the same boots, same hoodie shape, and same calm walk. The police picked him up 5 days after that break-in. No chase, no fight, no shouting. He surrendered quietly when cornered near a market. When they checked his bag, there was tape, gloves, zip ties, and printed maps. Nothing fancy. Just things you carry when you already decided the job will be long. The news reports said he admitted to sitting in dark stairwells during outages, waiting for a single distracted person to walk past so he could follow them into a blind corridor or apartment door left half open. No ghost story, no fairy tale reason. Just a person using patterns, load-shedding schedules, cold nights, and empty buildings like tools. I remember the eye more than anything, not because it glowed, but because it told me this was someone who waits more than he rushes. Someone who plans more than he reacts. Someone who saw darkness not as fear, but cover. Since then, when outages hit, I don't take the stairs alone. I keep a small emergency lamp clipped to my jacket. Not because it's bright, but because it makes me look like someone who sees more than one step ahead. And November still gets darker early. The power still cuts long. But that night taught me that fear doesn't always run. Sometimes it just waits. And patience can look more dangerous than violence when you meet it alone in the dark. November always smells the same here. Cold air, damp ground, metal from benches, and those tiny traces of wood smoke that drift from tea stalls near the gate. The semester was only a few weeks old, but winter donations were already in full swing. Students were sharing posters about charity drives. Coat collection bins were popping up in every corridor, and the campus notice boards had reminders about where to drop off old clothes. It felt early, but that's how November works in the north. 1 week you're fine, the next, you can see your breath when you walk outside at sunset. It was 4 p.m., late enough that the daylight looked tired. The sky had a washed-out gray color, the kind that feels low and heavy even without fog. The temperature on my phone showed 7 degrees C, but it felt colder because of the wind. I was walking back from the library with my backpack hanging off one shoulder, my hands buried in my hoodie sleeves. The campus was quieter than usual because most classes had ended. A few scattered students were still crossing the open walkways, but there was plenty of space between everyone. No crowds, no rush, That's when I saw the coat. It was draped over a long wooden bench near the edge of the central lawn, close to the tall spruce line that borders the campus field. The trees there are thick and old, full of shadows even during the day. The path next to them leads toward the older science block, a part of campus most people pass through without stopping. Because it gets dark fast there, half the streetlights along that route flicker or take too long to switch on. The coat stood out immediately. It wasn't the type students donate. Not old, not worn. This was expensive. Heavy wool or cashmere blend, lined with quilted inner fabric, buttons that looked like polished horn, and seams that were perfect. Dark brown, almost black depending on the angle. It was thick enough that one glance made me imagine how warm it would feel. The weight of it sagged slightly where it touched the wood, like it had a presence of its own, too nice to be left out in the cold. I almost walked past it, almost. For half a second, I thought it could be someone's prank or stage donation piece, but a coat like that? No student would casually leave something like that, unless they were insane or distracted. My body moved before I fully decided. I stopped, looked around, then approached it slowly. The grass near the bench was moist, with patches of frosted tips starting to form. When I knelt to feel the fabric, it was ice, chilled on the surface. Someone hadn't worn it for a while. It had already taken on the cold. There were fallen pine needles on the shoulder and a tiny streak of dried mud near the hem, like it had brushed against wet ground or a trail recently. The pockets were what made me open it. I thought if it was left by accident, maybe there'd be a student ID or driver's license inside, something I could use to return it to the owner. My campus still feels big even though I've been here for 4 years. People come, people go. You don't know everyone. Even if it's a place you call familiar. I slid my hand into the right pocket first. The liner was silky and premium. My fingers brushed against something soft, then leather, then plastic texture. My brain expected the shape of a wallet. Instead, I pulled out black gloves first. Thick, winter-grade, tactical kind. They felt padded and reinforced, the way security personnel or off-duty police types wear. Not knit gloves. Not student gloves. These were serious used gloves. There was no logo or brand name. I then reached inside again. This time, my fingers closed around something cylindrical and dense. I pulled out a roll of tape. Not regular transparent tape. This was industrial strength. Thick fiber-based layers and a coarse edge where it had been torn manually. The adhesive smelled sharp, chemical-like. It was the type used for packing or restraining or binding things temporarily. The kind you don't see in dorm rooms or classrooms. When I rotated it, the tape surface had faint fingerprints smudged on the sticky free outer rim. The left pocket was worse. Zipped ties. More than a few. Maybe 12 to 15. Bundled together with another broken tie holding them like a loop. The tail ends of the zipped ties were sharp, cut, not snapped off. Someone had used a blade on them. These zip ties were long enough to wrap around big objects, much bigger than wrists or cables or student storage use. They were at least 30 to 40 centimeters long each. The plastic was heavy-duty, ridged teeth inside. The color was neutral, off-white but not fully white, like generic manufacturing. There was a faint smell in the pocket too, rubber mixed with cold iron scent. Hard to explain, but immediately unsettling, like tools that have been stored in closed boxes or car trunks. Then came the thin gloves, disposable latex or nitrile neatly folded, still wrapped in a mini plastic sleeve. That made me pause longer. Why would anyone carry both tactical winter gloves and disposable medical gloves together in one coat pocket? I unfolded the coat slightly now, letting it spread on the bench. The inner zipper shined like new. There was one more thing in the coat, a sealed plastic pouch in the inside chest pocket. I unzipped that carefully because my curiosity was burning a hole in my brain at this point. My fingers were numb from the cold but steady. Inside the pouch was a printed timetable. The font looked copied from some spreadsheet. There were columns for days of the week, exact times, markers, and small notes beside certain entries. The header read, Security Patrol Shifts, November. Under it, different routes around campus schedules, but not official campus security formatted sheets. This looked handmade, personal, observational, like someone spent time mapping human movement patterns. The times were precise down to minutes. 6 and 10 p.m., 9:45 p.m., 11:05 p.m., 20:30 a.m., multiple entries for late nights. Beside one entry, the note read long overlap, slow turnaround window. Another note said, North Fence blind zone for 7.5 minutes. It felt like reading something I shouldn't be reading with bare hands. Below the timetable was a small printed map of campus, sectioned in red pencil circles. The printing looked like it was done at home or some cheap printer, slightly grainy. Edges were trimmed manually. One specific section near the old biology building had a bold text later pasted onto it saying, "No cameras in this section." That made my heart tighten in a way hard to describe. Not loud panic, just cold realization. The type that makes you stop feeling your surroundings for a second. There were more red circles around hidden walkways between blocks. Unlit corridors, storage entry paths, emergency exit doors, maintenance tunnels. The lowest corner of the map had something scribbled. Backup access if bench marker is present. Bench marker. I snapped my head up and looked around at the benches near me. This was the first time I noticed something. Most benches on campus are wood and metal, simple, sturdy, carved sometimes by students, names and hearts and batch years. But this one bench, the one under the coat, the underside edge had a small notch carved into it. A clean rectangular slot, like something could hang or attach there. I ran my finger over it. The shape was unnatural for general use. Too clean. My mind started running scenarios I didn't want to build, but my brain forced anyway. Someone left this coat intentionally. Not accidentally, not donation, not prank. Because it was placed near a blind zone, near trees full of shadows, close to a low traffic path, and the pockets held tools, notes, movement schedules. This was planning, watching, timing, prep. The coat itself was like a container of intention. I grabbed the coat and laid it exactly the same way back where it was. Same fold, same drape, same button position, same leaning posture. I didn't want to disturb the setup. That carved mark wasn't meant for me. I realized that clearly when my breath turned shaky. My body was hot inside despite cold air around me. Ice wind moved between the trees at that moment, brushing the coat hem slightly, like confirming it belonged to the cold now. I wiped my gloves on my jeans, stood up, pulled my backpack straighter, and started walking away. My steps on the grass were too loud in my head, even though in reality boots softened the impact. Everything felt louder now. My pulse, my breath, my jacket friction, even the strap of the bag rubbing against the hoodie. It felt like I had just walked into someone's blueprint without a warning sign. I didn't run. Humans in uncomfortable situations sometimes narrate running, but I didn't. Running draws attention, it raises questions. Instead, I made distance. 5 feet 12 p.m., the sun was almost out of sight. I checked the time not because it mattered, but because I needed to anchor myself to something normal. Cold math of time, not cold math of threats. By 6:03 p.m., I was at the student parking lot. Most cars were gone. Mine was still there, silver compact sedan, dusty from summer roads, normal, boring, safe. I unlocked it, sat inside, closed the door. The first wave of calm hit, not full relief, just containment. The metal door felt real. The seat under me felt real. The silence inside car insulated me from the silence that surrounds blind benches and spruce shadows. I didn't tell security that day. Not right away, because a report requires certainty, and I had no proof beyond personal encounter. Notes can have explanations. Tools can have excuses. A coat can be defended as misplaced property. But I remembered the details. The next day around noon, the campus sent out a general alert. Nothing detailed to provoke panic. Just a notice that suspicious items were recovered near the central lawn and students should be aware, especially after dark. The alert didn't mention the coat directly, but it warned against touching abandoned personal belongings. It advised students to report unattended bags or clothing or equipment that looked out of place in low traffic sections. Someone else must have found it too. Someone braver or more obligated than me. The bench still sits there as far as I know, but every time I pass the spruce line now, especially at dusk, I avoid looking too long. The cold isn't what scares me anymore. It's what people plan inside it. The coat taught me that winter doesn't only bring charity. It brings cover, timing, silence, and the assumption that everyone is too cold or distracted to notice the details. The clear end of this story is simple. I didn't touch the coat again. Security must have taken it away. No one talked about missing students or tape incidents. I guess the early alert and quick recovery broke whatever plan was being sketched around that bench. Nothing happened, and that nothing is the whole point. Some threats don't get to finish if someone spots the details too early. November stayed cold. Donation bins stayed full of old jackets and sweaters, and I kept walking slower near the trees, not because winter is scary, but because intent hides in mundane things: heavy fabric, spreadsheets, blind minute windows, and benches most of us assume are just places to sit. I finished the semester, graduated, left campus. Life moved forward. But I still think about that moment when my hand reached into a pocket expecting an ID card, but found intent instead. Most of campus forgot about the alert within weeks. Alerts fade, details stay, and if the coat really was a marker, maybe someone out there learned that the cold only works if you trust silence too much. I stopped trusting it that evening, seconds before night fully took over the lawn. That's how it ended. No harm. No event, just awareness and distance. The most non-dramatic, realistic ending a closed call story can have. Because most danger isn't loud. It's quiet, practical, chilly to the touch, printed on normal paper, and left casually on a bench under trees where the daylight always looks tired by 4 p.m. It was early November, the kind of November that feels heavier than the months before it. The air had a dampness that seemed to stick to my skin, chilling me even when I wore thick layers. The days were short, fading into darkness almost as soon as they began, and the evenings carried a strange quiet that made every sound sharper, more noticeable. I had driven out of the city that morning, looking for a break from the noise and the constant hum of people and traffic. The plan was simple: a long walk through a stretch of forest that ran alongside an old dirt road, far enough from houses and towns that I could be alone with my thoughts. The road leading there had been narrow and winding, lined with tall, bare trees that swayed slightly in the wind. Leaves crunched under my boots as I walked, dry and brittle from the recent cold snap. Most of the forest smelled like wet earth and decaying leaves, a smell I found oddly comforting. But there was also something else in the air. A faint metallic tang, subtle but constant. I told myself it was probably just the road, maybe some rust from old fences, but I noticed it every step I took. It wasn't crowded at all. In fact, I didn't see anyone else for nearly 2 hours, and that was part of why the place drew me in. The isolation felt complete. Birds had mostly stopped chirping, and the wind through the skeletal branches made long, low moans, like the forest itself was exhaling. I had my backpack with me, filled with water, a small thermos of coffee, a notebook, and a flashlight just in case. I didn't need it yet. The sky, though darkening, still had the last pale light of the afternoon. I followed the dirt road as it curved, the path ahead blocked in places by fallen branches. There were stretches where the forest pressed close, shadows bending unnaturally as I moved past them. I walked carefully, paying attention to the small sounds around me. The snap of a twig underfoot, the whisper of leaves as the wind moved through them, the occasional drip of water from a branch to the ground. It was all ordinary, but in that kind of quiet, ordinary sounds start to feel like warnings. About 3 miles in, the road narrowed even more, and the trees leaned toward each other across it, creating a tunnel of branches. It was harder to see, the fading light making everything appear darker than it was. I could feel my heartbeat picking up slightly. My instincts told me this was the part of the forest where most people would turn back, but I pressed on. There was a small rise in the road ahead, and when I crested it, I saw an abandoned cabin. It was small, maybe 1 room, with broken windows and a sagging roof. Paint peeled from the walls, and vines had started to crawl over the sides. It was the kind of place that made your stomach tighten without reason, even from a distance. I didn't go inside. I wasn't curious enough to want to risk stepping into it. I stayed a few feet away, just observing. The air around it felt colder, and I noticed for the first time the smell of something decaying more pungent than leaves. It wasn't a bad smell exactly, but it was off, like something had been left there for a long time and nature was reclaiming it. I considered taking a break, sitting on a fallen log nearby, but something about the shadows in the cabin made me uneasy. I kept moving, keeping the building behind me, following the road as it twisted deeper into the woods. As I walked, the wind picked up, and the branches overhead started tapping against each other, making a sharp, clicking noise. I slowed down, feeling the kind of awareness that only comes when you are truly alone in a place that could swallow you without a sound. Every rustle, every movement in the underbrush made me turn my head. I began to notice that the footprints I was leaving were the only ones on the road, except for a few old, worn tire tracks that were probably from a car months ago. That realization made the forest feel heavier. I started to notice small details. The way a tree had been split down the middle, the way some of the fallen leaves were pressed down in strange patterns, and a thin line of water trickling across the road that didn't appear to have a source. By the time the sun was fully gone, leaving only a gray, blue light fading behind the trees, I decided to set up a small camp. I found a relatively flat area beside the road, where I could see the path ahead and behind me. I laid down my backpack and took out my thermos, warming my hands on it as I watched the shadows grow longer. The forest had gone completely quiet now, the kind of quiet where even breathing seems loud. I sat there for what felt like hours, letting my thoughts drift. I reminded myself constantly that this was nothing more than a normal forest, a stretch of dirt road, an old cabin abandoned by time. But as darkness fell completely, I realized I was not seeing the forest the same way I had during the day. Shapes moved at the edges of my vision, and I kept expecting to see someone, or something, step out. I felt a tight knot in my stomach that refused to go away, but I told myself that it was just the wind, just the trees. Night deepened. I finally decided to make a fire. I gathered fallen branches, being careful not to disturb anything on the ground that seemed unusual. Striking a lighter, the flame jumped to life, small but steady, and I watched the firelight stretch across the nearby trees. The warmth helped, and for a moment I felt more human, more grounded. The forest seemed to recede slightly, the shadows less oppressive in the fire's glow. I drank some coffee, letting it warm me from the inside, and tried to think about how I would get back to my car in the morning. Then I heard a sound that made my skin crawl. Not a scream, not footsteps, but something like the scuffing of shoes over leaves, slow and deliberate, moving along the edge of the trees. My heart pounded. I stayed still, not making a sound, holding my breath. It moved closer, stopping now and then, the pauses making the sound feel calculated. I strained my eyes, but all I could see were the long shadows of the trees. It never came out fully onto the road. After what felt like an eternity, the sound faded, retreating back into the forest. My hands were shaking, and I forced myself to breathe slowly. I knew there was nothing supernatural out here. I told myself over and over that it was just another hiker, maybe someone lost, or an animal moving oddly over fallen leaves. I reminded myself that the road wasn't far from other trails, and that someone could have been walking nearby. That logic calmed me slightly, and I sat by the fire until the embers died down. When the first pale light of morning appeared, I packed my things carefully and started walking back. The forest looked entirely different in the daylight. The shadows were gone, the trees were just trees, the cabin just an abandoned building. The road felt safer. The strange smells and metallic tang had vanished, leaving only wet earth and leaves. I moved faster, eager to leave the deep woods behind, but the tension in my chest had loosened. I felt like I had survived something, even though nothing had directly threatened me. By the time I reached my car, the sun was fully up. I got in, started the engine, and drove back toward the city. My hands still shook a little from the night, but there was relief too, a feeling of triumph over my own fears. I realized that part of what had made it so intense was not just the forest, but the fact that I was alone and forced to confront my own mind. The world can feel terrifying when it's quiet enough, when every small noise becomes a question you don't know the answer to. I left the forest behind with a strange sense of respect for it. The trees were just trees, the cabin just wood and metal, and the sounds just ordinary things amplified by fear. I understood that I had survived November, survived the night, and walked away more aware of the fragility of feeling safe in a place that seems familiar yet is completely untamed. That sense of clarity stayed with me, even when I returned to the noise of the city. It was the kind of November I would never forget, the kind of night that reminded me how real fear could feel and how real courage is simply facing it and keeping your feet moving forward. I drove home, windows down, to let the crisp morning air fill the car, and I felt good knowing that the forest, the darkness, and the quiet had challenged me, but I had walked away. I had survived, fully awake, fully aware, and fully alive. I remember that November like it was a thick fog pressing against my skin. The days had shortened, and the cold had started to bite through my coat, even when the wind wasn't strong. I had chosen to go for a walk in the woods near my apartment, a place I thought I knew well enough to feel safe in. The trees were bare now, their skeletal branches scratching at the gray sky, and the leaves on the ground were damp, slick, and brown, the smell of decay thick in the air. It was one of those late autumn afternoons when the sun hangs low and pale, casting everything in a dull, orange, gray light that makes shadows look deeper and longer than they are. I had brought a small backpack with water, my phone, a flashlight, and a few snacks. I liked the feeling of being alone in the quiet, away from the buzz of the city, away from people who asked questions I didn't feel like answering. At first, it was peaceful. The trail was narrow, winding between thick clusters of trees, and the only sounds were the rustling of dead leaves under my feet and the occasional distant call of a crow. I walked slowly, letting the cold air fill my lungs. I didn't notice how quickly the sun was dropping. After an hour or so, I realized the woods felt emptier than usual. The usual bird songs had stopped, replaced by a heavy, unnatural silence. It wasn't the kind of silence you get in a park or a quiet street. It had weight, pressing against my ears. I thought I had just gotten deeper into the woods than usual, maybe on a side trail I didn't recognize. The path I was on was narrower, overgrown in places, and the ground was uneven, soaked from recent rain. My boots squelched in the mud, and the trees closed in around me, their bare branches intertwining overhead. I tried to convince myself it was just late November, the landscape stripped of life, making everything seem harsher and darker than it was. Then I realized I hadn't seen any footprints other than my own. The leaves were wet and soft, and there weren't any signs that anyone had been here recently. No trash, no discarded bottles, no distant sounds of other hikers. I had walked alone many times before, but there was something in the stillness that made me uneasy. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was imagining things. I glanced at my phone. No signal. My thumb hovered over the screen, then I shoved it back in my pocket. I hadn't needed it until now, and now, of course, it felt useless. I kept moving, telling myself I would turn back once the path opened into the clearing I knew was nearby. But the trees seemed to stretch endlessly. Every twist of the trail looked the same as the one before, the same wet leaves, the same thin branches, the same gray light filtering through the sky. My pace quickened, just a little, and my heart started to pick up speed. I tried to focus on breathing evenly, on the sound of my steps, but I couldn't ignore the feeling that I was being watched. I couldn't see anyone, and I told myself it was impossible that anyone was there. But the weight of the feeling pressed against my back, around my shoulders, in my chest. I decided to stop and look around. I set my backpack on a fallen log and squatted, scanning the woods. The trees moved slightly in the wind, a thin rattling, and the mud squished beneath my boots as I shifted weight. That was when I heard it, soft, almost imperceptible, like a footstep in wet leaves, far behind me. My stomach dropped. I froze. Another step, slightly closer. My first instinct was to run, but I didn't know where to. I tried to tell myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But the pattern of the steps didn't match anything I knew. I had spent enough time in the woods to recognize the difference. These steps were deliberate, heavy human. I grabbed my backpack and started moving again, faster this time, trying to stay calm. I took turns quickly, scanning the woods on either side. Nothing. My breathing was sharp, uneven, and I could feel sweat starting to bead on my forehead despite the cold. The footsteps didn't follow the pattern I expected. Sometimes they would pause, then resume, seeming to match the pace of my own steps, as if someone was adjusting to me, waiting, watching. Panic started to creep in. I knew the trail I wanted to reach, but it was farther than it felt, and now I was disoriented. I kept checking the sun, but it had dipped behind the trees completely. Darkness was coming, faster than I had prepared for. I clicked on my flashlight. The beam cut a narrow path through the blackened woods, illuminating nothing but wet leaves, twisted branches, and the occasional broken stick. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I could hear my breath, shallow and fast. The footsteps had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. It felt like the forest had swallowed all other sound, and only my fear remained. I kept walking, trying to keep my steps steady, trying to remember the path. I stumbled over a root, caught myself, and looked around. Everything looked the same. Then I saw it, just barely out of the corner of my eye, a shadow moving between the trees. I froze again, and my hand tightened on my flashlight. The shadow didn't move like an animal. It stopped whenever I stopped. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, but I knew better. I started running. Not jogging, but full-on running, slipping in the mud, brushing against branches, hearing my own shouting heartbeat in my ears. The trail twisted, turned, and finally I saw it. A clearing. A familiar clearing, the one I knew would lead back to the main path near the road. Relief hit me like ice water. I pushed harder, lungs burning, adrenaline driving me through the last stretch of the trees. When I emerged, the open sky stretched above me. The light was almost gone, but I could see the road in the distance, and a small cluster of cars parked where hikers had left them. I didn't stop until I reached the first vehicle, my legs shaking, my chest heaving. I leaned against the cold metal, trying to catch my breath, listening. Nothing followed. The forest was silent, and in the distance, the occasional car drove by on the road. I realized I was safe. I was alone, but I had made it out. I didn't understand exactly what had followed me, or if it had even been real, but the fear, the weight of it, was still pressing against me. I slowly walked back toward my apartment, still shivering, still checking over my shoulder, even though I was out of the woods. By the time I reached home, I felt exhausted in a way I hadn't felt before, the kind of tired that seeps into your bones. I locked the doors, drew the curtains, and sat on the edge of the couch. The sun had fully set, and the house felt warm in contrast to the chill that still lingered in my skin. I realized something important that night. I could be completely alone, and yet aware, alert, and careful could save me. Fear had almost trapped me, but paying attention, trusting my instincts, and moving carefully had gotten me back. I made a note to never wander into the woods alone in late November again. The memory stayed vivid for months. The quiet, the cold, the wet leaves under my boots, the weight of unseen eyes following me. But it also stayed as a reminder that even in a situation where I felt completely alone and vulnerable, I could rely on myself. I had survived, and the warmth of that truth was stronger than the chill of the November night outside.